Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our roundtable conversation on race, technology, and healing featuring Garrett's PhD students. Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary has been awarded a Science for Seminary Seed Grant from the American Association for the Advancement of Science, a Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion program. The grant has helped fund the Race, Technology, and Healing Science and Religion Dialogue project led by yours truly, Rolf Nolasco, Rueben Pijo, Professor of Spiritual Formation and Pastoral Theology, and Dr. Wanihi Anjo, Harry R. Kendall, Professor of Christian Theology and Postcolonial Studies. A component of the project included a group of Doctor of Philosophy students of color, along with a few Garrett faculty who met as a reading group over the course of this academic year to discuss Ruha Benjamin's book, Race After Technology. In both settings, students and faculty evidenced a strong and deepening interest in science and religion theology at the intersection of race, gender, sexuality, and class. This morning, we are very pleased to have Hamin Kwok, Kenya Tadol, and Myron Chris Florence, all PhD students in pastoral theology, personality, and culture here at Garrett, to share their reflections on how science intersects with their scholarly work and their field in general. Hamin, Kenya, and Myron will each present for 10 minutes and then engage each other in a conversation around their presentation. Our first presenter is Myron Chris Florence. Take it away, Myron Chris.
Thank you, Dr. Nolasco. I rode the bus home from my predominantly white high school in Dunwoody, Georgia, back to my black Decatur, Georgia neighborhood. I was a part of the M2M Minority to Majority program where they bused black students out of their neighborhoods to the quote-unquote superior schools in the white neighborhoods. When I got home from that hour and a half long commute, I would turn on the television and make something to eat. Two shows that came on back to back at approximately that time, the time I got home every day, which made it very convenient for me to enjoy them after a long day at school. Because I got home hours before either of my parents, I was able to unashamedly watch these shows without any side eyes. The first show was the series Will and Grace. It was one of the first times in my life that I remembered seeing gay men on television, not as the butt of jokes, but as people, as humans. On the show, Will Truman was a gay lawyer living with his roommate, Grace. Their neighbor was the gleeful, charismatic, and unapologetic Jack. Will and Jack were the symbols of gay culture on a television series, not just for gay people, but throughout the country. In fact, when then Vice President Joe Biden endorsed same-sex marriage in 2012, he cited Will and Grace as a factor in his and society's evolution on the issue, saying, "I think Will and Grace did more to educate the American public more than almost anything anybody has done so far. People fear that which is different. Now they're beginning to understand," end quote. Will and Jack epitomized gay. The second show that I would watch, which has also become synonymous with gayness, was Golden Girls. In the Out.com article, Why Golden Girls is Still the Gayest Show on TV, nightlife and celebrity journalist Michael Musto states, "Before Will and Grace existed, Golden Girls was the gay show to watch. Although neither Blanche, Rose, Dorothy, or Dorothy's mother Sophia were gay, the show from its inception did not shy away from queer topics, as its pilot aired a gay chef, and Blanche's brother came out as gay. Yet the elderly Sophia is the one that speaks to the skeptical women, telling them, in so many words, get over it. The show validated queerness, which was still a taboo topic at the time. Beginning in the 80s and 90s, these two shows, The Golden Girls and Will and Grace, showed that to be openly gay and accepted was shrouded in whiteness, a luxury that other races did not have on the screen. Yet what about non-white gays? Neither of these shows provided mirroring for queer and questioning people of color. To this point, the book Terrorist Assemblages, Homonationalism in Queer Times, argues that homonationalism, or the whitewashing of gay, homosexual, and queer bodies, as well as the presumed heterosexuality of colored bodies, was an intentional and politically motivated move to make these races seem more masculine and to project them as more menacing. Does television have this same objective? Television has often served as, quote, the primary source of information about gay lifestyles, cultures, and sexual behaviors for individuals who, of varying ages, who struggle or are struggling to understand their same-sex feelings and desires, end quote. While there has been some representation of black gay men on television, they are significantly fewer than white gays. Of the black gay representation, it begs the question, how are black gay men portrayed in television series? Glad you asked. Through analysis, we discovered that this demographic has been hyperized, known for extremes or over-the-top behavior. Three tropes that encompass television's portrayal of black gay men are hyper-flamboyant, hypersexual, and hypermasculine. One of the earliest portrayals of black gay men in the 1990 through 1994 sketch comedy In Living Color, created by Keenen Ivory Wayans and Damon Wayans. One popular sketch that appeared in the first episode and carried on throughout the tenure of the show was Men on Films, where Damon Wayans as the character Blaine Edwards and David Alan Grier as the character of Antoine Merriweather played two flamboyant and colorfully dressed men who critique the current cinema from a male point of view. Every critique of the film, spoken in a soft, hushed tone riddled with a lisp, leads to a sexual innuendo. Their analysis ranges from hated it to 3 snaps and Z formation. Dressed in a similar ethos, another example of the hyper-flamboyancy of the black gay male portrayed in the media came in 2013 with the American-based fashion show entitled Fashion Queens. Hosted by gender non-conforming and self-professed gay co-host Derek J. and Miss Lawrence, they both are adorned in heavy makeup, usually a bold lipstick, high heels, and a purse. Both Men on Films and Fashion Queens point to one stereotypical trope deemed acceptable for the representation of black gay men on television: hyperflamboyancy. Hypersexuality is another perpetuated trope. Noah's Ark was a comedy drama which aired on the Logo Network from 2005 to 2006. It centers the lives of 4 black gay friends living in Los Angeles. On their first date, in the opening scene of the pilot episode, Noah and Wade enter the bedroom, kissing and taking off each other's clothes. In their preparation, Noah and Wade go through 3 condoms, which all break as they are trying to open them. Not knowing what to do, Noah excuses himself and goes to the bathroom to call his 3 best friends, asking if he should have sex with Wade without a condom. On the 4-way call, one of the friends, Ricky, who they call the hoe, is in the middle of having sex with a guy as he is talking to them. Ricky randomly hooks up with the various guys that he meets. Hypersexuality is a theme that carries throughout the entire series. When the writer and director Patrick N. Polk was asked, "Why does it have to be all about sex?" he retorted, "Why the fuck not?" By far, the largest representation of black gay men falls in the category of hypermasculine, constituted in the forms of violence and toxic masculinity. In the series The Wire, Omar Little is a notorious Baltimore stick-up man who frequently robs street-level drug dealers. Although his character challenges the stereotype of flaming gays, he still, quote, continues to perpetuate the stereotype of young black men as dangerous criminals, which has devastating consequences for black men in the United States, end quote. It perpetuates the ideology that black men, both same gender loving and other gender loving, are violent and dangerous criminals that the larger society should fear. Finally, hypermasculinity in the form of toxic masculinity displays in the down low or DL brother. In the 2002 through 2008 show The Shield, Julian is a down low police officer who has sex with a man, Tomas, who is later imprisoned. Tomas outs Julian, announcing to all the police officers and inmates, "Oh, you got laid? And now you want to ignore me? That's right, I was his lover every night for a month. You loved me. You still love me. You can't even admit who you are. Your dick in my ass means you are gay. My dick in your mouth means you are really gay." Julian's response is to walk away, never acknowledging this claim, while the other police officers try to silence Tomas. Spoiler alert, Julian continues to embody toxic masculinity and internalized homophobia by going to a sexual reorientation program at his church, where he states that Jesus delivered him from same-sex attraction, eventually marrying a woman. Montrose Freeman is a character in the 2020 series Lovecraft Country, who spends most of his life trying to deny his same-sex attraction, and he even hypocritically whooped his son Tick's ass so that he wouldn't be soft. In the 2016 through 2020 show Greenleaf, Kevin denies his same-sex attraction and marries his wife Charity. He tries to pray the gay away and attends conversion therapy, where they give him this tonic to take whenever he has impure thoughts. This tonic will make him violently sick, which will intentionally and psychologically associate same-sex thoughts with pain. Two shows that explicitly epitomize the down-low experience is the 2007 series The DL Chronicles, and the 2012 follow-up series, The DL Chronicles Return. The premise of these two series is to show short stories about men of color who live double lives, cheating on their wives and girlfriends as they have sex with men. According to a study, sexual intercourse of down-low men exceed that of gay men. Thus, there is some validity in the hypersexuality in the down-low phenomenon. Yet what these shows fail to address is the culture that makes it necessary for same gender-loving men to suppress the complexity of their sexuality, causing them to feel the need to deny themselves and live the straight life. While these hyper-flamboyant, hyper-sexualized, and hyper-masculine representations may highlight some of the black gay experience, they do not represent all. What about black gays who are not considered extra or over the top? Where are the wheels from Will and Grace for black people who educate the American public on the average black gay experience? Although there are arguably some normalized black gay representation on television, such as Jamal on Empire and Lionel on Dear White People, they are significantly minimal in comparison to the hyperized Black gay identities. To conclude, how are these hyperized representations impacting an already marginalized race? While we can easily see hypersexualization and hyperflamboyance within white gay representation, as the dominant culture, these tropes can be less damning. In the book Hypersexual, Hypermasculine, Gender, Race, and Sexuality in the Identities of Contemporary Black Men, editors Brittany C. Slayton and Kimasha Spates note that both hypersexuality and hypermasculinity are controlling, socially constructed identities that do not necessarily represent, nor are they unique to Black men. Yet due to prevailing social structures, these aspects constrain or encumber the development of their identities. As we consider Black gay representation, we must grapple with the question, does the culture influence the media, or does the media influence the culture? What role is television meant to play in the perpetuation of cultural tropes, and how are these tropes hindering the development of Black gay male identities? Rueben Benjamin in Race After Technology informs us that companies intentionally capitalize on these stereotypes. Knowing this manipulation and capitalization of these stereotypes, how should we respond? Next, I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague, my friend. She is also in the clinical track like I am at CRPC, finishing up coursework. Her topic, her research gears around what I call Black girl joy, and the media's portrayal of helping or harming that joy and Black girl flourishing. Coming to us from Houston, Texas, I now welcome Kenya Tuttle.
Thank you, Myron, Chris. As y'all will see, there will be some overlap between my talk and Myron Chris's talk, especially around stereotypes and what they mean in media for people of color, particularly Black people, and how it relates to anti-Blackness. So my talk will be called #Black Girl Magic, Interiority, and Racial Coding. LaToya Peterson, Simone Brown, Sophia Noble, Meredith Broussard, Joy Bulawami Winnie, Virginia Eubanks, Sarah Ratcher Botcher. Do you know any of these names? These are the names of women, majority of them Black women, who have written and lectured extensively surrounding the clarion call about toxic texts, biased algorithms, and the surveillance of Blackness. But many of us, and especially youth, can recognize the logos of Apple, YouTube, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and other technology companies and social media apps. In the age of information, whether we like it or not, technology runs our lives, and as such, we must heed the warnings of coded inequities. For my talk, I want to bring to light the ways technology and racial coding get reinscribed in nuanced ways in the particular lives of Black girls and how this affects their identity that is being formulated by these messages they receive in person and online. Critical to our discussion today is Rueben Benjamin's term, the new Jim Code, which she describes as the employment of new technologies that reflect and reproduce existing inequities, but that are promoted and perceived as more objective or progressive than the discriminatory systems of a previous era, end quote. Benjamin's line of thinking is built on several other ideals, and many of the Black women I just named, who have warned of the ways racism is embedded in technology, yet is labeled as objective, progressive, and colorblind. I will argue that technological codes, as both reflective and predictive of society, operate as powerful meaning-making systems for Black girls' development, as both a site to resist stereotypes and a location to claim voice, self, and community. Anti-Blackness is encoded in every aspect of daily life, especially technology and media, sexualizing Black bodies and making them both hyper-visible and invisible. Hashtag Black Girl Magic highlights the way Black girls as digital natives are constantly resisting the racist and sexist stereotypes encoded in technology, yet they are also building self and community through their social media. Social media appears to be a tool for democratic cyberspace, offering digital native Black girls a place to voice self, make meaning, and connect with others. Yet cyberspace is contested by what these women previously named have described using various codes and terms, such as the New Jim Code, technology redlining, racialized surveillance, techno-chauvinism, algorithmic inequity, coded gaze, digital poorhouse, and other key concepts, naming the ways our current racial societal oppressions are a precondition for the codes and the technologies we use daily. Thus naming how the social stratification and racial inequalities we live in person are inputted and inscribed into our digital space in more profound ways. Technology and the New Jim Code are used to reinforce old racist, sexist stereotypes, such as the Jezebel, the mammy, the matriarch, often portrayed as the angry Black woman, and the welfare queen. For example, imagine as a Black girl being able to celebrate the victory of Madam Vice President Kamala Harris as the first Black woman to be elected in the second highest position in our country, only for it to be under fire first in the pulpit and later on Twitter by angry white Southern Baptist preachers calling her Jezebel Harris, and then backtracking, stating they were not aware of the racist undertones of such name calling. Black feminist and culture theorist Tamara Lomax, who wrote Jezebel Unhinged, Loosing the Black Female Body in Religion and Culture, was nationally interviewed multiple times to unpack what it means for white Southern preachers to call the Vice President of the United States a Jezebel. Her response was simply that these men of the cloth sent a powerful message to the Vice President, which was watch yourself. That as a Black woman, she does not hold power over men and she must be put back in her place. These types of public racial discourses seek to delimit the future dreams of Black girls. Black girls are not oblivious to these kinds of racist undertones in the media and threats of violence, as their livelihood depends on being constantly aware of these said threats and dangers around them. So I ask, is media or technology safe? In the age of information, is freedom of speech or democracy safe? Is it possible for Black girls to curate safe spaces online? Especially given the operative ways neoliberal politics promote private acquisitions and buyouts. Here I'm thinking about this week's private purchase of Twitter. My goal is to highlight the necessity of a trauma-informed digital literacy for Black girls and their caregivers that holds the New Jim Code in tension with what should be a democratic online space for digital native Black girls as they seek to create their own communities, cultures, and futures of psychological well-being. In thinking about the tension between innovation and containment, Sophia Noble, 2018, in her Algorithms of Oppression, presents her groundbreaking case study in Google searching for Black girls in 2011, which results come up with sexualized images and text of Black girls. These results persisted for years. And the results were similar for other Black girls of color, Hispanic, Latinx, and Asian girls. Noble argues that the anti-Black and sexist Google search results, such as the pornographic images that come up when you search for Black girls, grow out of a corporate logic of either willful neglect or a profit imperative that makes money from racism and sexism as key ingredients in the normative substrate of Silicon Valley. It is in this tradition, then coupled with an understanding of how racial and gender identities are brokered by Google, that we can help make sense of the trends that make women and girls' sexualized bodies a lucrative market on the web. And what was Google's response? To start Black Girls Code initiative to teach Black girls how to code. Yet Noble argues, although it is a virtuous undertaking, it is not the answer for today's current problems. She critiques this intervention because naming the problem as a pipeline issue only pushes the problem to young Black girls to fix in some distant future, when racial bias in coding can be traced back to today's investors. Noble writes, the largest commercial search engine fails to provide culturally situated knowledge on how Black women and girls have traditionally been discriminated against, denied rights, are violated in a society and the media, even though they are organized and resist on many levels. Noble's research on Google's search engine that engenders racism and sexism is especially tangible for me, as I was struck by how much power Google had in my own classroom. As a middle school English and social studies teacher of Black and Hispanic girls, I taught students how to conduct scholarly research for their yearly National History Day projects. My objective was to help them understand what reliable and credible resources were, and much of these resources were being found online, as these digital natives did not frequent libraries. My biggest obstacle, Google search engine. No matter how in-depth and practical my examples were, their young minds as digital natives had grown accustomed to using Google searches for everything. This research history project was no different. And Google was the easy way out, or at least the way they started their meaning making in search of an appealing topic or resource. The far reach of Google's power transforms the ways young people make sense of the world. Furthermore, Noble's uncovering of racial discrimination present in Google's search engine is critical, since this information operates as a culture self-object, signifying self and culture back to you. As I have previously claimed, technological codes, as both reflective and predictive of society, operate as powerful meaning-making systems for development, as both a site to resist stereotypes and a location to claim voice, self, and community. Knowledge of self for digital native Black girls in the age of information is contested both online and in person. Williams and Moody, in their 2019 study, analyzed selfie, stereotype enactment, projection, and identification among digitally native Black girls, found that the digital space Black girls frequent to be both a constitution of the intersectional challenges that Black girls face in the real world and a democratic platform for them to create content that suits their needs. This article highlighted, as a demographic group, Black girls are one of the highest users of social networking, spending over 8 hours a day on sites such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. Hence, social networking sites are contexts for socialization, mechanisms for the perpetuation of societal values, including the racial, socioeconomic, and gender stereotypes that affect their identity development of African American girls. As digital natives are individuals who have always had access and exposure to the internet and technology, they are constantly connected to others, and they read and write through technology and think in ways that are largely influenced by digital interactions. Thus, how the child sees herself is a consequence of the messages her environment provides about her identity and worth. And therefore, her behaviors and attitudes are a function of that messaging. The digital world Black girls actively engage in is potential space to form deep connections and build identity and interpersonal skills. Williams and Moody argue for the importance of digital literacy as an opportunity to develop Black girls' self-esteem and help them navigate the psychological aspects of stereotyping and social media usage. And this digital literacy support is best performed in person while engaging the interaction of Black girls online. According to their study, adolescent girls are motivated to share self-narratives online as ways to increase their sense of self, sought through an increase in connection and intimacy. This is also similar to other findings about how girls are able to make a sense of their self. But like the feminist motto, the personal is political, for digital native girls, the social and the public is also highly personal, as they share intimate moments of themselves online. Not only are Black girls sharing personal narratives about self, but they are also using social media as a tool in evaluating the world around them, such as potential friends and partners. In a study titled, "How Black Teen Girls Navigate Social Media to Form Romantic Relationships," it displays that Black girls use social media to gather information about the qualities of others, in this case for potential partners, through social media, paying attention to signs of racism and how one navigates these isms through their use of memes. According to these Black girls, memes tell you about a person's sense of humor, but also what is important to them. This study demonstrated that Black girls are sophisticated in their evaluation of social networking sites, making distinctions for their uses of Twitter for political purposes, but also Twitter's use as a platform to learn about a person's real self, noting that people tweet their true unfiltered processed feelings in the middle of the night. And this information is used to evaluate their partners and their friendships. These examples underscore the sophistication Black girls have at assessing the social and political power of Twitter. Their digital literacy is extended to make sense of the political world and the power moves of today's leaders, as they are the ones that are usually following these celebrities and liking their images or retweeting their messages. So in the age of selfies and tweets, when you are the data, how do you resist and how do you respond? Identity is mediated through media images and racist and sexist stereotypes, and these act as technological codes, giving youth messages about who they can become and how they are viewed by society. For example, criminal is coded through the images of mugshots of Black male teens. Young Black girls are coded through the images of loud, angry, and sexualized Black women. These limiting stereotypical images reflect to Black youth their potential future and what society allows them to become. The internalization of these racial and gender coding is exposed when you ask youth about their future goals and they answer uncannily resemble limited characters of what Black success often looks like, confined to sports, art, music, for entertainment purposes. Technological codes using hashtags have become powerful meta discourses to claim digital space and resist toxic dominant narratives. Rogers and et al. Study in 2012 explored Black girls' identities and intersectionality in media using the hashtag Black Girl Magic. This research uncovered that media is a relevant socializing agent for Black adolescent girl identity. Their results demonstrated that the media curated story of #BlackGirlMagic, with its emphasis on positive affirmation, is part of, but not the whole of, what it means to be a Black girl. Although half the Black girls reported that they were not familiar with the message, with the Black Girl Magic message, yet and still they understood the positive affirmation the hashtag meant and represented as an opportunity to be seen and heard in society that deems them invisible and silent. The research found that #BlackGirlMagic was used as a source to affirm positive narratives in Black girls and as a way to resist stereotypes, exclusion, stigma, and societal oppression. In this way, #BlackGirlMagic may serve a dual function as a socializing agent, a message of both inward self-affirmation and an outward group affirmation to society right large. It is a proclamation to others about who they are and how they want to be seen. The message of #BlackGirlMagic nurtures the identities of Black girls, but it is not exclusively for Black girls. It is also a message for Black girls to society. The magic in this message is not superhuman, but ordinarily human. As one Black girl explained, we are still people. Thus, the socializing influence of #BlackGirlMagic may not be unidirectional, but transactional, where Black girls view the media message as supportive of their own identities, certainly, but also as a tool to shift societal hegemonic narratives about Black girls. Older adolescent girls ages 16 to 18 provided more nuanced interpretations of this hashtag as both celebrating group identity, but also the ways that it hinders them. As I have claimed, through these examples, the power of technological codes to reflect and predict society's racism and sexism operates as powerful meaning-making systems. I will now turn to womanist pastoral theologian Phyllis Shepherd and her work in Tilling Sacred Grounds, Interiority, Black Women, and Religious Experience, to explore the convergence of technology and its effects on the interior life. Interiority is defined as the psychological existence, interior quality, or character of the inner life. Shepherd states, the interior then is comprised of aspects of our relationship to the broader culture that are apparent and conscious as well as unconscious elements. Cyberspace is a site where Black women negotiate the tension between self, religion, and their communities. Cyberspace is fluid, mirroring interiority and the movement between self, community, and the public space. Shepherd names cyberspace as an artifact and a cultural container facilitating the formation of self and identity. She offers 5 aspects to her understanding of cyberspace as a culture self-object using womanist ethnography and psychoanalysis. She writes, first, it is the ideal that cyberspace is an interior construct. That is, cyberspace is an experience one has. Second, cyberspace exists as a place one visits. Thus, it has an existence beyond my presence. Third, cyberspace is a facilitating container for the formation of self and identity, and thus is a self-culture object. Fourth, cyberspace is a place for the experience, creation, and formation of community. Fifth, and finally, cyberspace, because of the preceding conceptualizations, is a site for the practice of religion, end quote. These 5 descriptions of cyberspace are the realm of the interior social space, and these form a cultural self-object milieu. As a culture self-object milieu, cyberspace is a site where culture self-objects and artifacts are actions that are related to both one's reflection of culture identification and as an interior dimension of oneself. I extend womanist pastoral theologian Phyllis Shepherd's claim that the location of religious experience is Black women's interiority, and this interior dimension is in fluid exchange with public spaces, especially cyberspace for Black girls. Therefore, hashtag Black Girl Magic becomes a cultural identification or marker, providing opportunities for Black girls to feel mirrored in kinship with others and to expose idealized aspects of what it means to be Black and female. So in conclusion, we need more viable methods of pastoral care that digital native Black girls can use to combat the new Jim Code and maintain their sense of self in the world. Thank you. And now I would turn it over to Hameen. So Hameen and I started our coursework together for the last 3 years at CRPC, and we are finishing up in the next month. And so Hameen comes from Seoul, Korea, and has a wonderful wife and 2 kids that I adore. And so please present and introduce to some Hameen Kwok. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. Thanks for introducing me, and thanks for inviting me in this very wonderful presentation. Maybe I can start with some fancy description about science. Science and technology have completely changed the human history. The numerous scientific discoveries and inventions within only 3 centuries have certainly made human material life as rich and convenient. In particular, the development of the internet has created a society in which anyone can easily learn various information and express their thoughts. Just imagine, if anyone can easily learn and share their thoughts, how can there be monopolizing oppression and international conflicts? Isn't it true that we can create a society where everyone thinks rationally and makes equality that religions cannot do? However, we all too often overlook the fact that the technology we create exists within the flow of history, which is full of contradictions and paradox. What does science mean by equality? What is the ideal of technology being free from racism, war, famine, and crime? Strictly speaking, it is not equality, not a salvation, but the paradoxical propaganda under the utopian guise of technology. Scientific development has historically led to colonial and imperialist extortion, letting colonizers invade other countries and tribes. The more land the colonizers had, the more resources they could have for technological development. So it was considered important and natural for imperialists to establish and exploit colonies. Indeed, the modern abundance in this process is created by the suffering, blood, and tears of many colonized people. Too often, we ignore such historical causality and try to forget it, simply dismissing it as the past. And we are only trying to enjoy the current comfort given to us. The result of social-cultural and collective dissociation of the history is today's globalization. We are living a life of conflict and oppression that is not different from the past. The past results in cultural trauma, which is not completely restored between peoples, countries, and individuals' deep-rooted wounds, and we are simply prioritizing material and capitalist success. In her book, Race After Technology, Rueben portrays these contradictions and dissociation in technology based on its racist and colonial groundwork. She tells how the Jim Crow law, which has thoroughly oppressed African Americans in the past, is being replicated and amplified in modern times through technological camouflage. She calls it as the new Jim Code and defines it as the employment of new technologies that reflect and reproduce existing principles, but that are promoted and accepted as more objective and progressive than discriminating systems of previous era, end quote. Is the modern technology really an objective and progressive for us who are living the life of social, cultural, and historical dissociation? Benjamin stresses it is not by critically pointing out the blatant form of racism in our society and the deeply ingrained phenomena of discrimination and social industrial dimensions as a form of engineered inequality, default discrimination, and coded exposure. It is not the only case of science, history, and culture. In the book, The Colonization of Psychic Space, Kelly Oliver pinpoints how the colonial values that have evolved in line with the development of technological industry is deeply internalized in our unconscious. She argues that the violent and cruel superego of the colonizer dominates the colonized subject's psychological inner world and creates a sense of inferiority of the colonized and that of superiority of the colonizer himself. In light of Benjamin's explanation, this psychological operation is still functioning in today's modern science, which is now claimed to be advanced. Furthermore, the contemporary technology encourages such emotional and affective colonization in distorting the image of the subject in virtual reality. Here, I would like to explain the psychical colonization and distortion of image by taking an example of South Korea, especially Korean tendency of whitening. Everyone wants to look pretty. Sorry. Everyone wants to look pretty and handsome. Koreans are no exception. Korea is already an advanced country for plastic surgery, and the people have a desire of being looked beautiful and having a perfect body. The appearance of beautiful people on Instagram and Facebook can be held in one's hands every day of their life. And it creates a fantasy for that appearance, brainwashes that it is superior, and constantly encourages us to take it. They easily spread their propaganda, which is not equality and a salvation. Capitalist marketing makes people consume various beauty products in an indiscriminate way. Sometimes people distort their images to look better by projecting the fantasized figure to their faces and bodies. In particular, Koreans' longing for white skin has framed the color as superior and perfect one, and whitening has become an inextricable representation of beauty. Photographic skills to make one's face white or using whitening cosmetics is a history that is not far from the reality of the Korean mode of life. In the past, Korea's colonial experience has developed into a pattern of admiring Western culture on multi-layered levels. In her book, Whitening, Sojung Park notes about the social political meaning of whitening in the Korean context. Koreans were always under Western influence throughout Japanese colonization, although there was no direct colonial experience by the West. Or they often wanted to escape from the Japanese colonialism through the Western leverage. As a result, they achieved modernization with an envy for the West. Whitening is a significant touchstone of how Korean values were colonized at this historical and cultural level. The setup production of plastic surgery, whitening cosmetics, and photography also facilitate a huge cycle in which Koreans who have darker skin feel a sense of deprivation and inferiority to consume more commodities that have whitening effects in a well-geared setting of capitalist system. Of course, we cannot deny that the yearning for whitening in Korean history has been in the cultural context very long time. Many historical records before the colonial period describe how a beautiful individual figure has a pure white skin. However, as we live in the present, we need to ruminate on how such a sense of desire for whitening has been relocated and reorganized within the current Western-centered and post-colonial world system. Can we only explain the Korean desire for whitening as a cultural heritage from the ancestors? If we can say that, then why are we disconnected from the painful past, the experience of colonization, as if it didn't affect us at all? Perhaps this is a matter of social cultural dissociation again, in a discursive and non-discursive way in which people avoid the traumatic memories. The Korean consciousness, disconnected from the past trauma, is full of fanciful dreams that expect an optimistic future that science indicates. Can we consider that this is a fabricated trap of neocolonialism and white supremacy, which are deeply embedded in our discursive ideology and non-discursive daily life, and have prevented us from investigating their past violence? In this sense, we have to pay our attention from the future to the past to reconnect the dissociated mind and our painful memories. From a psychotherapeutic perspective, reconnection is essential for restoring the fragmented pieces of traumatized injury. So this attempt of reconnection is not for disregarding the positive view of technology and future-oriented prospects, but for deconstructing the traumatizing structure of colonialism and reconstructing a relational solidarity between peoples and cultures so that we can move toward a more life-giving and healthier future. This is the way we can recover our psychological pains and trauma from the oppressive values and eventually anticipate the real future, which is not with scientific propaganda, but is in a relational connection with others. In an epistemological aspect, this connection is not only scientific, but artistic and even spiritual. The important task is to explore how we promote the mode of connection and crafting the spiritual way of resistance, as Benjamin talks about retooling solidarity and imagining justice in her agenda. By participating in this inquiry, I envision that we can get the real meaning of salvation and reconciliation. Thank you. So maybe this time we can continue our conversation by asking some questions to each other. So maybe Kenya will start the question.
Thank you, Hameen. So I'm gonna start my question for Myron Chris. Myron Chris, we both talk about the power of stereotypes and get at an internalization process in which two things happen: acceptance or resistance. Either way, the stereotypes are in our psyches, just as Du Bois describes in the process of double consciousness. So in what ways does the internalization of media stereotypes limit gay Black men's ability to flourish? And secondly, what are the tactics deployed for resistance to survive?
Thank you, Kenya. So you can keep yourself unmuted because we're going to have a conversation. And I also am going to invite Hameen to kind of start considering this question even for himself for the sake of time. We don't have about 6 minutes or so we can kind of engage all of these questions together as long as we have the time. So thinking about that double consciousness, I mean, for you, from the Korean perspective, for me with the Black gay male perspective and how that's limiting flourishing and our surviving. I think one of the problems, the things that's happening is what I call othering. So even though, as in my presentation, I discussed how there is some Black gay representation, but the three tropes that I mentioned, the hyperflamboyance, hypersexuality, hypermasculinity, if you don't fit in those categories, you still feel othered. So you're not the white gay, but you're not even the Black gay. You're not masculine enough. You're not feminine enough. So then you we talked about, I think many of us talked about the mirroring that TV should provide or does provide. And that lack of mirroring still creates, okay, well, I'm not gay enough. They're going to take my gay card because I don't fit these tropes, these stereotypes. So then that can, I think, could cause low self-esteem, as we know, when there's a lack of mirroring, cause people to feel inferior and isolated. But I think the way around resisting that, which will require some vulnerability for people, is to find community. If, for instance, if no one knows you're gay, then you can't build that gay community. And that's a poor example, but you get the point. That you have to expose yourself some and say, this is me, which means you have to admit that to yourself first, which you talked about, that acceptance. And that is by far one of the hardest things, even for many people. I met a person very recently, and he said he didn't come out to himself till he was 45. He's 56 now. So, I mean, that process of how long it takes for you to come out to yourself varies depending on who you are. So I think all of these, the things that's necessary to overcome these stereotypes and these tropes, unfortunately, as you mentioned, even Kenya, putting the onus on those that are already victimized, those that are already hurt and wounded from the media stereotypes, it kind of puts that on us to kind of do our own work. But then I don't know, and I'm open to conversation around this, I don't know how to do it other ways, because the dominant culture is not going to change their rhetoric. So if we don't do it, we could say, well, it's not my job, it's not my responsibility to show a different image. But if we don't do it, then who will do it? So I invite Hameen, Kenya, what are your thoughts around any of that, especially in your particular situations?
Yeah, thank you, Myron. I think, yeah, that would become a very meaningful make a meaningful conversation in our discussion. Before that, maybe I can also ask some questions to Kenya about her presentation. So through Kenya's points of argument, I learned how today's new gene code has been coding Black bodies and images into its racist frame, and how Black girls are also vulnerable to be exposed to the racist undertones in the media. I learned it is so important to increase the digital literacy for people of color in order to recognize the hegemony framework of racism and to create a pathway of the counter-hegemonic resistance against the digital racism. I also found how Black Girl Magic movement is so powerful movement in empowering Black girls and creating their solidarity so that they can navigate the hidden meaning of a stereotype. And I think Benjamin also addresses the importance of abolitionist tools for the new gene code. I believe BGM is also a supportive tool for resisting the hegemonic narratives about Black girls. So my first question is, how do you conceive the role of Black girls in using this abolitionist tool in their daily lives? When they find their agency and self-affirmation from this tool, and if it is a message from Black girls to society, what kind of message they can provide to people, especially for other marginalized people in this global world? My second question is this, regarding that the role of pastoral theology is focused on caring activities for suffering people in the name of God and communities, then what would be the response of pastoral theology or theology in terms of using the virtual setting for the digital native generation? So you're considering the cultural self-object milieu in conceptualizing the counter-hegemonic solidarity for the Black girls. How is the place of theology understood through the lens of what Shepherd mentions?
Thank you, Hameen. I'll just say briefly, I know we're right at time, so I'll just say briefly, I'll start with the second question. I think that for pastoral theology, what is important is like what we've named about the ways that stereotypes and images are internalized because of, as we know, like self-psychology and our need for mirroring, twinship, and idealization. Like these media images hold a lot of power in our process to make sense of who we are in the world and what we can become. And so I think that's important. And so first is having the conversation about the fact that popular culture, media images, stereotypes, television is important, and it does affect our internal psyches of who we are and who we can become. So I think that's first. And then second is having the conversations, because as Myron Chris said, these stereotypes and tropes are going to continue due to anti-Blackness and due to the ways white supremacy operates in the world. So the main thing is, how do we then have these kinds of conversations offline, as well as using hashtags to then talk about the ways that we resist and then counter these types of narratives. And I think that's the part that's really key, is like, what do we do on our own? And I'm thinking of Awkward Black Girl, right? With Issa Rae, that then turns into Insecure, which gives you a very complex understanding of what Black women go through and Black girls go through. And it's not a flat reading of a stereotypical trope. And so just continuing to have those kinds of things in place and in the media is very helpful. Thank you.
I think we are right at time, Dr. Nolasco. Give us a little.
Myron, I believe we have a question for Hamin, and then I'll say a few words before we end this particular part of our event.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So, I mean, one of the questions at which Kenya was talking about the double consciousness, and I was thinking about the, as I've been told, that Korean men often wear makeup, and I see that as pushing against the stereotypes of Western, what it means to be masculine. So I was wondering if you could just speak to, and this is the only question I'm asked, speak to the ways that Korean masculinity already resists the Western or U.S. notions of what it means to be masculine.
Yeah, I also agree that so because of the contextual difference, the standard of beauty is quite different. So the standard of beauty in Korea is very different from the United States. Also considering the masculine beauty, the standard of masculinity. And you also mentioned about the heterosexual Korean men's makeup. And that is also very, how can I say? Yeah, natural phenomenon in Korea, especially in many kinds of broadcasting platform and many kinds of stage so in my personal opinion, that has a very double-edged sword. The standard has a very double-edged sword. In the positive view, I believe it can provide another standard of beauty, another standard of epistemological aspect about our beauty in this global system, because you know the hypermasculinity is very dominant, and it also allows so many kinds of dominating and oppressive values in this world. But I think, yeah, another cultural diversity, for example, the Korean resource can provide so many kinds of meaningful factors for that. But also in negative view, it does not mean that Korea has no any kinds of hyper masculinity or patriarchy in their context. So there is also very severe form of oppression, which force many kinds of submission of women and many marginalized people. And also there is another kinds of oppression in terms of whitening and some kinds of cosmetic beauty, and we call it as a lookism, and it is another form of ism. So lookism just provides many people many propaganda like good-looking person is very superior and others are very inferior, and there is also many kinds of hierarchical levels. So we have to consider how we can just conceptualize and these kinds of new standard to our global system, and what kinds of mindset to resist the kinds of a hegemonic framework of colonial and oppressive values in this Eurocentric and Western-centered viewpoint in this world.
Thank you so much, Kenya, Hamin, and Myron Chris, for your insightful presentations and conversations. Well done. We are so proud of you.